Everyone's top tip for a future world champion. Kevin Lee has been released from his UFC contract. Let's talk about it before we do. My name is Rahul J. Chand. This is the Battle Camp. Thank you very much for joining me. If you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. So this came as a bit of a shock to me when Kevin Lee got released earlier this week, but at the same time I wasn't surprised, like Nate Diaz wasn't surprised. And there's a load of kind of different things, moving parts that I kind of started to contemplate, started to ponder when this news broke. And I kind of, my initial reaction was to come onto YouTube and make a video about it all, but I decided to wait because I knew Kevin Lee being Kevin Lee, he'd be interviewed by someone. Do you know what I mean? And Ariel Helwani had the honor of interviewing Kevin Lee on his show yesterday evening. And I found it quite interesting. And to be fair, a lot of the things that Kevin Lee said yesterday, I kind of sympathized with. And I don't often find myself in a position where I'm sat there sympathizing with Kevin Lee. Now, I've made multiple videos about this man, and I suppose the reason why I kind of find his career interesting, fascinating, is because how it's played out, and kind of his performance levels against the expectations he's had on him as a professional fighter. Like, I've heard multiple analysts, journalists, ex-fighters talk about Kevin Lee, and basically a lot of people have proclaimed that he's definitely going to be a future champion, right? And he's one guy that I've just never seen a future champion in. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've seen him fight and I thought to myself, why is everyone so hot on this guy? Why does everyone believe that this guy has this massive potential to be the best in the world when I've never actually seen him in the octagon produce a performance that reflects that? You know, we've seen flashes, we've seen moments, but we haven't seen a sustained period of time within a fight where Kevin Lee has shown just how good he is. And the reason why I'm talking about that is the videos that I've made about him in the past is I believe that his kind of perception of himself, of just how good he is, and his dedication to improving, they didn't correlate with each other, because I felt like he felt he was a better fighter than he actually was, and I felt like he didn't train like the great fighters tend to train, right? And that's why you kept seeing shortcomings in his performances. Now, when we're looking at the fact that he got released, there's a couple of things, like I said, that you need to consider. First and foremost, he's only on a 2-fight losing streak, right? So generally speaking, when it comes to UFC releasing fighters, it's usually, and there's no hard and fast rule with this, it's usually 3 fights. You lose 3 fights in a row and you're out, right? On this occasion, he's only lost, I've seen a lot of people talking about how he's only lost 2 in a row, and the fight before that was a spectacular head kick knockout of Gregor Gillespie. But you can look at it 2 ways, right? It's 2 defeats out of the last 3, or you look at it and you say, actually, it's 4 defeats out of the last 5. On top of that, obviously, he's now serving this suspension because he failed a USADA test because it's, what was it? Adderall, is that what the medicine is that he takes for his ADHD, and that some substance within that medication is not legal, so he's serving a 6-month suspension. That might add to it. But what I didn't know, and this is kind of inside knowledge, I suppose, is when he came on to Ariel Helwani's show yesterday, and how Ariel Helwani was surmising, he was speculating that actually, do you think the fact that you've got the same manager as the dog's misbehaving? Do you think you've got the same manager as Francis Ngannou has had an impact in the UFC making this decision to release you? Because obviously the relationship between Francis Ngannou and the UFC currently is quite strained, and the manager that Ariel Helwani was referring to had a public fallout with Dana White. Right? I personally didn't know this, but now that I do know this, I do believe that there is a huge possibility that this has played into the UFC's decision-making process. Another thing that Kevin Lee wasn't very happy about is the fact that the email that he received confirming that the UFC are choosing to release him from his contract was dated the 17th of November, even though they only received the email themselves this week, which doesn't really make sense to me, right? Because either did someone just forward an email trail onto Kevin Lee and his team, where Dana White and other people are discussing, shall we let him go? Shall we keep him? Shall we let him go? Shall we keep him? Nah, fuck it, let's let him go. And that was all the way back in 17th of November. And then Sarah and that HR just forgot to forward it on to Kevin Lee for 2 weeks. Like, it doesn't make sense to me how there's a date of the 17th of November. Like, the date you send the email is the date that's on the email, right? That's how things work in Outlook. But yeah, so that's another thing. So he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy with the way in which the UFC went about releasing him, and which also speaks to this strained relationship that Ariel Helwani was questioning Kevin Lee about. Kevin Lee was being a little bit vague in his kind of assessment of how things played out, because he was saying it's politics, but he wasn't really talking about what the politics behind all of this was, right? I saw a lot of people talking about how, you know, how is smiling Sam Alvey still in a UFC contract when he's lost like 17 fights in a row or something, and they've let Kevin Lee go, who is genuinely a top 10, top 15 fighter. But then obviously you need to kind of work out what the value of a fighter is to you, because smiling Sam Alvey, I can't assume is on a massive contract, and judging by what they were talking about yesterday on the interview, neither is Kevin Lee. But it's about kind of what the UFC are investing in a fighter and what they're getting out of that investment. And Kevin Lee at the moment isn't really providing them with much upside. He's losing fights that you could argue he should be winning in terms of his last opponent, and I do sympathise with him a little bit, because he's stuck between a rock and a hard place with his weight division, because he's halfway between a lightweight and a welterweight, and now he's decided that he's going to stick at welterweight, and he just seems way too undersized. Personally, what I think he needs to do, and you know, what do I know? I just sit in my bedroom making videos about MMA. I really feel like he needs to pick a camp and stick to it. Like, he's been drifting over the last couple of years, and there was a moment where he went out to Quebec, I think it is, to train with Firas Zahabi, and that's actually when he got that spectacular knockout against Gregor Gillespie. But I don't know whether it was a financial decision or just a practical decision, going out there for camps, etc., whether it was to do with costs and whatnot, and everyone's got their own their own issues that they're dealing with in life, and Kevin Lee's been very vocal about his struggles with alcohol and mental health and all of that stuff. It just all seems jumbled up, and that's why I felt like we were getting jumbled up performances from him in the octagon, because he never seemed to listen to the advice his corner were giving him. His performance didn't have any rhyme or reason. It didn't seem like he was fighting to a game plan or to exploit any weaknesses of his opponent. It just felt like he was doing things on the spur of the moment. It was whimsical almost, and that's why he was being exposed by his opponents, especially like fights like against Al Iaquinta back in 2018. Al Iaquinta effectively schooled him, and he came out of that fight talking about Kevin Lee. I'm talking about here, came out talking about this fight like how he had won the fight, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, mate, like, you're delusional. And that's something that I've accused the guy of over the years, because of how he carries himself, the things that he says in interviews. And I always kind of compare Kevin Lee to Tyrone Woodley, because they're two guys that I feel like have a just delusions of grandeur in terms of where they are in the sport, what their value is in the sport, how good they are. And I never get the impression that they're actually putting in the work that the best in the world seem to put in to attain those positions in the sport. Now, I feel like I'm just bashing Kevin Lee here, and that wasn't my intention. It was just, I suppose, like, I see why people see this potential in Kevin Lee. I see why journalists are adamant that, you know, Kevin Lee is good enough to be champion one day. I can see why they have that opinion. But I just feel like he's his own worst enemy, and I wish he would just sort it out. And I wish he would be, and you know what? I suppose that's the difference between top level fighters and fighters that don't quite live up to the hype and potential. It's the mental side of things, and who knows, man? Maybe it's a struggle that he will never be able to master, you know. And I kind of like fear for him in terms of what he does next, because when they were talking about his, you know, his options moving forward, and obviously he is a name in the sport, let's be honest, you know. So there are different organizations that are looking at him, and they were talking about this triad boxing, and they were talking about PFL potentially, and I'm assuming Bellator will be sniffing around him. I just hope, and he was talking about how, you know, he's going to now be able to, he'll make the biggest paydays he's ever made, because that wasn't happening in the UFC, which is fair, and he deserves it. Anyone that fights deserves as much money as they can possibly make. But I just wonder, I feel like there's a lack of guidance for him, or he doesn't seek guidance enough. And I wonder whether he'll make a decision that will help with the longevity of his career, where he can get the most out of his career with the next steps he takes. And that's what I'm a little bit worried about, because I don't know whether he will, man. I don't know whether he will. But yeah, it's interesting, man. The whole dynamic of this release and how it kind of came just out of the blue. Because bearing in mind, his last fight was back in August, and they decided to release him in November. Usually when the UFC release a fight, it's pretty soon after the last defeat. And whether, again, going back to Francis Ngannou, obviously he's been in negotiations with the UFC over the last couple of months. He is fighting in January against Cyril Gane for that heavyweight title, or for the undisputed heavyweight title, I should say. Whether that has played into this decision to release Kevin Lee, it's looking increasingly likely. Now, whether the UFC are actually doing Kevin Lee a favour, or whether this is going to be basically just downhill from here for Kevin Lee, like he's peaked now and this is it, like his career will just go the way of Melvin Gillard or someone like that, or Paige Van Zandt, you know. Who knows, man? Who knows? Time will tell. But he's actually a guy that's actually in his prime when it comes to age and physicality, etc. He has had some difficult injuries, but he is a guy that it's not obvious that he's past it, right? His next 2 or 3 performances will dictate whether that's a fact or not, whether those injuries have had a massive effect on him. But at the moment, he seems as though a guy that's in his prime. So, yeah, I feel like I've gone all over the place here, and I haven't made a video in absolute ages, so maybe I'm still a bit rusty, but I feel like I've made the points that I needed to make. I've hit the topics that I needed to talk about. So now it's your turn. Put your comments below. Let me know what you think about this decision by the UFC. Let me know what you think about the stuff that I've said in this video. If you haven't already, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. I'll catch you guys in the next one.